And tributes are pouring in this morning for Rock and Roll Hall of Famer Leon Russell.
Before the world said goodbye to Leon Russell, there was a truth he carried that never made headlines. It was about George Harrison. These two legends stood together at one of the most defining musical events. Everyone saw the fame, the music, and the success. But what Russell witnessed behind the scenes was completely shocking. Russell experienced what Harrison was really like when the lights were off, the crowds were gone, and the pressure was unbearable. And this truth about Harrison's personal life would shock you. Russell and Harrison's iconic partnership. In August 1971, two musicians already respected as masters in their own lanes crossed paths at a moment that would change the meaning of rock collaboration. Leon Russell and George Harrison shared a stage during one of the most ambitious live events the genre had ever seen. The night felt like a celebration, but behind it was hard work, rehearsals, late nights, and non-stop musical problem-solving. For Russell, it was a rare chance to see Harrison up close, away from Beatle fame and studio polish. And what he witnessed stayed with him. Leon Russell had been working professionally since his teens. Born Claude Russell Bridges on April 2, 1942 in Lawton, Oklahoma, he built his reputation the hard way, with long hours, many roles, and no spotlight guaranteed. By the late 1960s, he was known across the industry as a musician who could do almost anything. The nickname Master of Space and Time wasn't marketing. It came from peers who watched him move between piano, guitar, arranging, producing, and leading bands without losing momentum. His resume already included sessions and collaborations with artists at the very top of popular music, and his songwriting had real emotional reach. George Harrison arrived at that same moment from a different direction. Born February 25, 1943 in Liverpool, he had spent a decade inside the most famous band in the world. As lead guitarist of the Beatles, he had grown from a quiet junior member into a songwriter capable of standing shoulder to shoulder with Lennon and McCartney. Away from charts and touring, Harrison had also pushed himself into Indian classical music, studying and collaborating closely with Ravi Shankar. By 1971, Harrison was no longer interested in being just a former Beatle. He wanted to use his influence with intention. That intention took shape as the Concert for Bangladesh, held on August 1, 1971, at Madison Square Garden. Organized by Harrison and Shankar, the concert aimed to raise funds and awareness for refugees affected by the Bangladesh Liberation War. What made it unprecedented wasn't just the cause, but the scale. Major artists committed their time with little rehearsal and no guarantee of perfection. The lineup included Bob Dylan, Eric Clapton, Ringo Starr, Badfinger, Billy Preston, and Leon Russell. It was a working musician's environment under global scrutiny. Russell's role was immediate and physical. His medley of Jumpin' Jack Flash and Young Blood was raw and high energy, cutting through the formality that often hangs over benefit events. When he later joined Harrison for Beware of Darkness, a song from All Things Must Pass, the contrast was striking. Russell didn't soften Harrison's writing or compete with it. He supported it, giving the song weight without excess. That balance, knowing when to lead and when to stay out of the way, is something Russell was known for, and Harrison definitely noticed. During the concert, Harrison wasn't just performing. He was managing pressure few musicians ever face. He was coordinating artists, overseeing sound, and carrying the responsibility of the cause itself. After the shows, he stayed involved as producer of the live triple album with Phil Spector, released in December 1971, and the concert film that followed in 1972. The project raised millions for UNICEF and went on to win the 1973 Grammy Award for Album of the Year. It also set a template for every large-scale benefit concert that came after. For Russell, those weeks weren't just career-expanding, they were revealing. Harrison worked with quiet intensity, often reserved in public, but deeply focused behind the scenes. He was serious about the cause. Russell saw the strain that came with that responsibility and the discipline required to carry it. Their connection didn't turn into a long recording partnership, but it definitely endured in subtler ways. Russell's participation in the concert tied his name permanently to a moment when rock music proved it could act collectively and responsibly. Years later, Harrison's Dark Horse Records partnered with BMG to preserve and reissue Harrison's catalog, keeping the concert for Bangladesh era alive for new listeners. From the outside, the Bangladesh concerts looked like triumph after triumph. However, inside them, both men were carrying personal weight. Russell understood that kind of pressure well, and what he witnessed during that period would later shape how he spoke about success, exhaustion, and what it costs to keep going. Because behind the applause and historic headlines, Leon Russell's private life was already marked by struggles that threatened to upend everything he had built. Leon Russell's hidden struggles. Leon Russell carried physical and emotional weight long before success ever entered the picture. His difficulties didn't begin in adulthood or during career decline. They were present from birth, shaping how he moved, played, and saw himself long before audiences knew his name. Russell was born with serious complications. During delivery, a doctor reportedly pulled too hard, damaging his second and third vertebrae. The injury caused nerve damage often described as cerebral palsy-like in effect. His right side was weaker, slightly paralyzed, and he walked with a noticeable limp. His right hand never had the same strength or control as his left. Yet, instead of ending his musical ambitions, the limitation forced adaptation. Russell leaned heavily into his left hand on the piano, developing a style that felt unorthodox but powerful. A style listeners later praised as originality actually began as necessity. At 4 years old, Russell experienced an incident that left a deeper psychological mark. A stern aunt discovered him in an innocent childhood situation with a cousin and reacted harshly. She paraded him in front of family members, publicly shaming him and accusing him of wrongdoing he didn't fully understand. The moment stuck, and Russell later spoke about how that humiliation planted a lasting sense of shame and confusion. It affected how he viewed himself and how easily he assumed blame, even when none was deserved. Those early experiences followed him into adulthood, even as his career took off. By the late 1960s and early 1970s, Russell was everywhere. He was writing major songs, producing records, performing at historic concerts, and leading his own bands. From the outside, it looked unstoppable. But internally, the insecurity never left. When the industry shifted in the late 1970s and early 80s, Russell's position changed fast. His record sales dropped, radio moved on, and labels stopped prioritizing him. The transition was abrupt. He went from headlining large venues to playing small clubs, sometimes to audiences who barely recognized his name. The decline wasn't gradual enough for him to adjust emotionally. One decade, he was essential. The next, he was overlooked. Financial strain followed. Much of the money Russell earned during his peak years disappeared through poor deals, management issues, and the simple cost of keeping a band on the road. Touring became less about artistic choice and more about survival. He played constantly to cover expenses, often without the industry support younger or more fashionable artists received. By the late 1990s and early 2000s, Russell was living quietly in Nashville, largely absent from mainstream conversation. Despite being a key figure in rock history, He watched peers receive honors, retrospectives, and renewed attention while his own contributions were rarely highlighted. Comparisons were hard to avoid, especially with artists like Elton John, who openly credited Russell as a major influence, yet enjoyed far greater public recognition. Russell expressed frustration about this imbalance, not out of bitterness toward others, but from a sense that his work had slipped through the cracks. That sense of being forgotten weighed heavily on him. Russell had spent decades supporting other artists, writing for them, producing them, and lifting their records with his playing. Yet he stood alone when his own visibility faded. In 2010, Elton John stepped in directly, collaborating with Russell on the album The Union. The project brought Russell back into public view and introduced his work to a new generation. The renewed attention was welcome, but it also showed how much help he needed to regain footing in an industry that had once relied on him so heavily. Sadly, that same year, Russell faced a serious health crisis. He underwent brain surgery to correct a buildup of fluid, a condition that temporarily halted his career and threatened his ability to perform. Recovery was slow, and even in his final years, his health continued to decline. He dealt with heart disease and other complications, which limited his stamina and mobility as he aged. Throughout his life, Russell was known for a pessimistic streak. People close to him noticed a pattern. When presented with both a hopeful interpretation and a negative one, he instinctively chose the darker conclusion. This outlook showed decades of physical hardship, early shame, and repeated professional disappointment. Self-doubt remained constant, even when evidence suggested he deserved far more confidence. The same need for control that helped him survive childhood injuries, industry neglect, and financial loss didn't disappear once his career stabilized. It followed him into business deals, marriages, and creative choices, where disagreements turned public and loyalty was tested. By the late 1970s, the struggles that once stayed private began spilling into lawsuits, breakups, and criticism that reshaped how the world saw him. The scandals Leon Russell faced. One of the most damaging conflicts Leon Russell faced centered on Shelter Records, the label Russell co-founded in 1969 with producer Denny Cordell. Shelter Records was created to give artists freedom at a time when labels were tightening control. Early on, it worked. The label became respected quickly, signing artists like Tom Petty and J.J. Callaghan, releasing records that felt artist-driven rather than corporate. However, as the label expanded, cracks began to appear. Money management became a point of contention. Decisions about ownership, control, and long-term direction caused tension between Russell and Cordell. By the late 1970s, the disagreements had escalated into legal battles. Lawsuits followed, and the partnership deteriorated publicly. What began as a shared vision turned into a prolonged dispute that drained Russell financially and emotionally. The fallout weakened Shelter Records and left Russell wary of future business arrangements, reinforcing his belief that control was safer than trust. At the same time, his personal life was unraveling in full view of the public. In 1975, Russell married singer Mary McCreary, and the relationship quickly became intertwined with his work. Together, they released Wedding Album, a project that blended marriage and collaboration into a single statement. The closeness that fueled the album also created tension. Creative disagreements didn't stay in the studio. They carried into the marriage, where control, expectations, and constant touring created even more strain. By 1980, the marriage had ended in divorce. The separation was not private. It drew attention because the partnership had been so visible. Russell also had 6 children, and balancing family life with an exhausting schedule proved difficult. Touring, recording, and managing business conflicts left little space for stability at home. The pressure showed, and the breakup added to a growing perception that Russell's life was increasingly chaotic behind the scenes. Criticism followed him musically as well. In the late 1970s, Russell released country-leaning albums under the pseudonym Hank Wilson. The decision confused fans who associated him with rock, blues, and gospel-influenced piano music. Some critics accused him of abandoning his roots or distancing himself from his own reputation. Others questioned why an established artist would hide behind another name. The Hank Wilson albums didn't perform strongly. Their modest sales kept the debate alive and added to the sense that Russell was drifting away from the spotlight. While country music had always been part of his background, the movie came at a time when his visibility was already fading, which made the shift look risky rather than exploratory. Another source of controversy Russell had to deal with was the strained working relationships he had. Russell had a reputation for being demanding in the studio. He expected musicians to be prepared, focused, and precise. During the Shelter Records years especially, sessions could become tense. Some musicians later said he was difficult to work with, not because of ego, but because he insisted on control. He wanted things done his way, and compromise didn't come easily. That approach had worked earlier in his career when his authority was rarely questioned. As his influence declined, the same behavior caused friction. Band dynamics suffered, collaborations ended abruptly, and the environment around him grew smaller, with fewer people willing to push back or stay long-term. It wasn't long before Russell's reputation shifted from respected innovator to complicated figure with unresolved conflicts. And by the early 1980s, the damage was visible. Industry support faded, opportunities narrowed, the control that once protected him now isolated him. And while Russell was dealing with business collapse, divorce, and criticism, other artists from the same era were facing their own private struggles. Among them was George Harrison, whose outward calm masked a very different set of battles that would soon come into focus. George Harrison's personal struggles. George Harrison entered the world's biggest band as the youngest member, and that position followed him for the rest of the Beatles' career. From the beginning, the group revolved around the songwriting partnership of John Lennon and Paul McCartney. Their dominance wasn't subtle. Album space, studio time, and creative authority flowed in their direction, often leaving Harrison with limited room to grow. Inside the band, he was frequently labeled the Quiet Beatle, a description that understated both his ambition and his frustration. Harrison wasn't short on material. As early as the mid-1960s, he was writing songs consistently, bringing them into sessions only to see most of them set aside. Even as his writing matured, the pattern stayed the same. On many albums, he was allotted 1 or 2 tracks at most, regardless of the quality of what he submitted. This wasn't a matter of ability. Songs like Something and Here Comes the Sun later proved that his songwriting could stand with the very best of the era. During the Beatles' years, though, he had to argue simply to be heard. The rejection built slowly. Harrison stockpiled dozens of songs that never made it onto Beatles records because there was no space for them. That creative bottleneck became a source of constant tension. Studio sessions stretched on, and Harrison often found himself playing guitar parts for songs written by others, while his own work waited in the background. The imbalance left him feeling undervalued, especially as the band moved into more experimental territory where his ideas could have thrived. Those frustrations fed into personal conflicts. Harrison's relationship with Paul McCartney grew especially strained as McCartney became more assertive in directing arrangements and performances. Rehearsals increasingly felt like power struggles rather than collaborations. Harrison pushed back, sometimes quietly, sometimes directly, but rarely successfully. With John Lennon, the tension took a different shape. Lennon's lifestyle, shifting beliefs, and confrontational personality clashed with Harrison's growing spiritual focus. Their disagreements weren't constant, but they were unresolved, creating distance rather than resolution. Fame itself became another source of conflict. Harrison never embraced Beatlemania, the way some of his bandmates did. The screaming crowds, constant attention, and loss of privacy wore him down. Touring felt less like sharing music and more like enduring chaos. He often spoke about feeling trapped by the celebrity lifestyle, unable to move through the world as a normal person. That discomfort pushed him outward. Harrison began traveling to India, studying Indian music, philosophy, and spirituality. His relationship with Indian culture wasn't a phase or a marketing move. He studied seriously, formed deep ties with teachers and musicians, and incorporated these influences into his life and work. The sitar, the philosophy, and the discipline offered a form of structure that fame never had. Even then, the struggle didn't disappear. Harrison's devotion to Hinduism and Krishna consciousness became central to his identity. He lived comfortably, owned property, and remained globally famous while trying to detach from the very things that defined his public image. Balancing those opposites proved difficult. Spiritual discipline demanded humility and detachment, while his career demanded visibility and influence. He tried to reconcile the two, sometimes successfully, sometimes not. By the time the Beatles began to fracture, Harrison was carrying years of unaddressed frustration. He had grown as a songwriter without the space to fully express it. He had found spiritual grounding without escaping public scrutiny. He had wealth and recognition without the peace he sought. But George Harrison's search for peace did not spare his personal life. As his inner world grew more complex, his marriage quietly began to fracture. He married Pattie Boyd in 1966, at the height of Beatlemania. From the outside, they looked like the perfect couple, young, famous, and admired. However, inside the relationship, pressure built quickly. Harrison's constant travel, shifting priorities, and growing involvement with illicit substances strained the marriage. To make matters worse, infidelity became part of the breakdown, and this compounded the resentment and emotional distance. Boyd later described feeling isolated, living in the shadow of Harrison's fame, and his inward turn toward spirituality that often left little room for her. The marriage deteriorated slowly, without a clean rupture, until a far more public fracture appeared. That fracture came in the form of Eric Clapton, one of Harrison's closest friends. Clapton fell deeply in love with Boyd and made no effort to hide it. He wrote songs about her, declared his feelings openly, and pursued her while she was still married to Harrison. The situation created a personal triangle that spilled into public view. Boyd eventually left Harrison for Clapton, turning the private heartbreak into a public spectacle that tabloids followed closely. The betrayal cut deep. Although Harrison and Clapton later reconciled and maintained a complicated friendship, the damage lingered. Trust had been broken on multiple levels, both marital and personal, and the episode reinforced Harrison's sense that intimacy often came with loss. The fallout became one of the most talked about personal scandals connected to him. Harrison's second marriage, to Olivia Arias, brought greater stability. Olivia knew exactly how to manage the realities of fame, and their relationship avoided the volatility that ruined his first marriage. Even so, it wasn't untouched by problems. Public attention never fully receded, and Harrison's later health crises placed new pressure on the relationship. One of the major challenges Harrison faced throughout his adult life was illicit substance use. During the 1960s and 70s, experimentation was common within his circle, and Harrison was no exception. Certain substances played a role in his spiritual awakening, opening him to new philosophies and reshaping his view of music and purpose. However, it soon became difficult to control. Substance use affected his focus, his relationships, and his ability to stay emotionally present. The line between exploration and escape blurred, especially during periods of disillusionment with fame, and the music industry. Those habits didn't disappear quickly. Even as his spiritual commitments deepened, the pull of excess remained, creating contradictions that he struggled to reconcile. In December 1999, Harrison experienced a trauma that shattered any remaining sense of personal safety. An intruder broke into his home and violently attacked him. The injuries were serious, and the incident left a lasting psychological impact. Harrison survived, but the attack changed how he lived. Security increased, privacy narrowed further, and his sense of vulnerability lingered long after physical wounds healed. Health challenges followed closely behind. Harrison had been a heavy smoker for much of his life, a habit that eventually caught up with him. In 1997, he was diagnosed with throat cancer. Treatment forced him to slow down and withdraw from public life. Sadly, the illness returned later in more aggressive forms, including lung cancer and eventually a brain tumor. As his health declined, Harrison retreated almost entirely from the spotlight. Public appearances became rare. Recordings slowed. The man who once stood at the center of global attention now moved carefully, conserving energy and time. Fame, which had once overwhelmed him, faded into the background as survival took precedence. And while much of this unfolded quietly, pieces of it surfaced publicly, through headlines, lawsuits, and scandals, forming a trail of controversy that followed him even as he tried to step away from it. George Harrison's controversies. For someone who spent much of his life trying to escape conflict, George Harrison found himself pulled into a long list of disputes that followed him well beyond the Beatles. One of the most painful episodes came from his biggest solo success. In 1970, Harrison released My Sweet Lord, a song meant to express devotion and spiritual unity. Not long after it became a global hit, Bright Tunes Music filed a lawsuit claiming the melody closely resembled He's So Fine by the Chiffons. Harrison denied deliberate copying, but the court ruled that he had subconsciously plagiarized the earlier song. The case dragged on for years. It cost Harrison large sums of money and consumed enormous emotional energy. What hurt most was not just the ruling, but the implication that his sincerity had been compromised. After the verdict, Harrison became extremely cautious about songwriting. He second-guessed melodies, delayed releases, and openly worried about unintentionally repeating something he had heard before. The lawsuit became one of the most famous plagiarism cases in music history, and it left a permanent mark on his confidence as a writer. That lawsuit was not an isolated problem. Harrison also spent years fighting over publishing rights and royalties. Like many artists of his generation, he had signed contracts early in his career that limited his control. As time passed, he became increasingly focused on reclaiming ownership of his work. Those battles brought him into conflict with record companies and business partners, reinforcing his distrust of the industry side of music. Business troubles followed him from the Beatles as well. Harrison was deeply frustrated with the mismanagement of Apple Corps, the company created by the band. What started as a creative hub quickly became disorganized, financially unstable, and chaotic. Harrison watched money drain away while decisions were delayed or mishandled. That frustration intensified under the leadership of Alan Klein, who took control of the band's finances. Harrison clashed with Klein over transparency and authority, and the disagreements widened existing cracks between the Beatles. Even Harrison's most generous project became controversial. He organized the Concert for Bangladesh to raise money for refugees. The concert itself was a success, but problems followed. Tax laws and legal complications delayed the release of funds, and critics accused the project of mismanagement. Harrison insisted that the money eventually reached UNICEF, but the delays overshadowed the original intent. What should have been a clear humanitarian triumph became a lesson in how difficult it is to move charity through legal systems unprepared for such scale. Personal scandals added another layer to his already controversial image. Harrison had an affair with Maureen Starkey, the wife of Ringo Starr. The situation caused serious strain within their circle. Ringo was hurt, friendships were tested, and trust was damaged. Although the men eventually moved forward, the episode left lasting tension and complicated relationships that were already under pressure from fame and business disputes. Despite the tensions, Harrison maintained selective friendships with people he believed understood him beyond the headlines. Connections built not on image, but on shared experience. One of those relationships, with Leon Russel, would later reveal a quieter truth about loyalty, respect, and what really held their bond together. The truth about Russel and Harrison's friendship. The bond between Leon Russel and George Harrison was built quietly, through shared work, long rehearsals, and mutual observation. They came from different backgrounds, believed in different things, and approached music from different angles, yet they recognized something solid in each other early on. Russel was struck by Harrison's calm authority. Harrison didn't lead by volume or dominance. He listened, waited, and then made decisions that carried weight. In rooms filled with famous musicians and strong personalities, that restraint stood out. Russel had spent years around artists driven by ego and urgency, but he noticed that Harrison felt different. His focus always stayed on purpose rather than image, especially during moments when pressure was highest. That difference became clear during preparations for the concert for Bangladesh. Harrison carried the responsibility of organizing a massive event with little precedent. Russel watched him absorb criticism, logistical chaos, and creative disagreements without unraveling. The endless rehearsals revealed how seriously Harrison took the project. Musically, their collaboration was respectful but not effortless. When Russel worked on Beware of Darkness, he approached it through his own instincts rather than imitation. He did not attempt to replicate Indian music, but he leaned into texture and mood, using unconventional instruments and rhythms that nodded to Harrison's influences without copying them. Harrison welcomed that approach. He valued interpretation over imitation and trusted Russel to bring something personal to the song. Russel also noticed that their studio temperaments differed. He preferred efficiency and instinct, while Harrison favored repetition and refinement. Harrison was known to pursue take after take until he felt something settle into place. Russel found that process exhausting, sometimes frustrating, but he understood where it came from. Russel did not share Harrison's deep involvement in Indian spirituality or Krishna consciousness, but he took Harrison's devotion seriously. He saw it shape the atmosphere around him, how Harrison spoke, how he treated people, and how he framed music as something larger than entertainment. That worldview influenced Russel indirectly. It didn't change his beliefs, but it expanded how he thought about music's role beyond success or recognition. From Harrison's side, the respect was equally clear. He admired Russell's adaptability. Russel could move between rock, gospel, blues, and soul without losing identity. During the Bangladesh concert, Harrison valued Russell's energy and grounding presence on stage. Harrison saw Russel as part of a wider group of musicians who understood music as service, not just performance. What do you think about Leon Russel and George Harrison's friendship? Drop your thoughts in the comments section below. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to click on the next video on your screen, like this video, and subscribe to our channel for more updates.